This month's Project Hail Mary film is being praised as a fresh, thrilling sci-fi take that is wholesome and sincere. As expected, we are now seeing more fantastical fans cry out for stories that celebrate the human spirit and move past all the dystopian tales. Why do we love these stories? And how do different fan trends, even across whole generations, keep swerving between positive portrayals and other stories that may be called cynical?
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
The tales are true, and the movie was amaze, amaze, amaze. This is Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com. Our mission is to help you escape bad books and explore the best Christian-made fantastical stories for Christ's glory. I'm Stephen Burnett, and I publish Lorehaven.com. I'm also the author of my own sci-fi novel that launched last year from Enclave Publishing. 2 sequels on the way. It's called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zachary Russell, and I sit at this table periodically. This is episode 306. Why do fiction fans fight over optimism versus cynicism?
Zach, some people are optimistic, some people are more cynical, some people vote left, some people vote right, but right now everyone is voting for Team Grace and Rocky Save Stars. How did you and your family feel when you inevitably went to see Project Hail Mary and you left that theater?
It was fantastic. I saw it on a double date with Naomi and some of our friends, and then realized I should have invited a lot more friends because so many people I know have read the book and wanted to see the movie. And as we record this, both my teenage daughters have seen it with their friends. And in fact, I need to catch up with my oldest daughter about her experience. Seems like everyone I know, even the most unlikeliest of sci-fi fans, are really enjoying this movie.
I think, Zach, everyone was just looking for a film that everyone could celebrate. I will say, with just a few very mild exceptions, this is a family film. You could bring an unusually astute 10-year-old in here. I heard kids in the audience laughing, especially at You Know Who. This film has legs, all 5 of them. And I, too, joined the party. I'm not coming in here with a cold take or some counterintuitive response. Project Hail Mary, the book and the film, are truly great, and it's wonderful to see a story at the cinemas that has proven legitimately unifying.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and we're not even really going to talk about this much, but the 2 negative things I've seen about it really expose the people and say more about the critics than it does anything about the film. And in one case, it was just someone that's just way too addicted to negativity and cynical stories. And in another case, it was someone who didn't like the film because someone he didn't liked it. And it just shows how petty some people are at core. There's really nothing to dislike about this movie. I mean, it has, I don't know what I saw last, like 95% positive ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's, if you haven't seen it yet, please go see it. And not to send Hollywood a message, but simply because you're going to enjoy it. And I can almost guarantee that. I mean, there's no financial commitment here, but go see it and just to enjoy a great movie that other people are enjoying.
Hey, they're not even a sponsor. We'll get to the sponsors in just a moment. That's what helps keeps things running at Lorehaven, is sponsors of this podcast and the website, Lorehaven.com. We do reviews almost every Friday of the best Christian-made fantasy and sci-fi that we've found. You can see a new review coming up this Friday after episode release. You'll also find articles there, the complete podcast archive, and as of recently, a newly boosted search option for the library. You can now go in there. It's a real website, Mom and Dad, and click on these different variables that you want. Sort all of the books that we've got, over 1,500 curated titles between men and women, boys and girls, different age levels, as well as different genres. And you can even add a keyword there just for fun. Subscribe free as well. Get updates. Join the Lorehaven Guild, our castle on Discord, where we do monthly book quests, like next month's book quest for April, which is going to be for Lindsay Llewellyn's novel, The Chaos Grid. That's from Enclave Publishing, our top sponsor, which just released a new novel, a fantasy. I saw it just recently, #2 in its category on Amazon, just behind the Wingfeather saga. This is The Star Blessed by Angie Dickinson. 3 legendary origins of power, 2 royal bloodlines, 1 deadly curse. The kingdom of Stellaris is slowly dying. A season of poison infects the air, earth, and water with increasing deadliness each year, and a deep love of golden power infects the failing mind of the king. His only daughter and first in line to the throne, Princess Saren, lives in tightly controlled isolation. When she is suddenly thrust into royal society, she struggles to hide the strain of untamed magic awakening in her blood. Saren's newly appointed personal guard, Sir Corin, resents the exile of his people. As heir to a long-banished line of succession and the last of the land's legendary protectors, he holds no loyalty for the current royal family and their history of unhinged cruelty. As death steals over the kingdom and the schemes at court grow deadlier, the princess and the guard are forced to face their fears, their troubled pasts, and the cost of personal freedom. Enclave Escape presents The Star Blessed, a reimagining and reinventing of 2 Grimm's fairy tales, Rumpelstiltskin and Catskin. The Star Blessed is by Angie Dickinson, available now wherever fantastic books are sold. Ask for The Star Blessed at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online from Amazon. It's also available as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. You can learn more at lorehaven.com/podcast. See all those sponsors at the top. And our second sponsor is Realm Makers, the 2026 conference and expo. Now, last night while I was asleep, my wife and I drove there, and for some reason we drove all the way back, even before the conference began. But that's okay, because we'd forgotten a lot of stuff. I don't know how we had the time for that. But in real life, that was a dream I had. In real life, don't miss the premier gathering for Christian storytellers of fantasy and science fiction, calling all authors and artists in the industries of graphic novels, gaming, animation, and audio drama, as well as film and TV. Realm Makers is where you will find your tribe, own your craft, and advance your career. Registration is open now for this in-person and virtual event coming this June 24th through 27th at the St. Louis Union Station Hotel. Get 3 full days of training from professionals, plus the epic Realm Awards costume banquet to celebrate the best novels released last year. Readers are invited to the expo on Friday and Saturday, and shopping is free for the general public. Tickets are required only to attend the sessions and panels, as well as meet and greets with special guests. I think, Zach, you and I will be on the free side there at the Lorehaven booth. I'll be there anchoring the booth, along with Above the Circle of Earth, maybe chat a little bit about sequel potential. Learn more at realmmakers.com, or see the show notes for the links as well. And by the way, I'm sounding really optimistic about this conference. I almost always am, but any cynics are welcome also. See where increasingly the heart is for Christian fantastical fandom on Earth. You'll find a lot of what we discuss in Chapter 1, optimistic stories that celebrate common grace. And I would put Project Hail Mary, the original book by Andy Weir, firmly in that category, alongside Weir's freshman debut, The Martian, which I also read. Although we'll say, those who've only read The Martian has a lot more bad words in it. Don't jump straight to The Martian if you like Project Hail Mary. You're going to need some disclaimers there. But the film version of Project Hail Mary, I'd say with very few exceptions, it is linguistically clean, which you might expect from the directors of the Lego movie, actually. Phil Lord and Chris Miller. They seem to like to keep things wholesome.
Yeah, and there's actually a fun in-universe reason for the lack of profanity that in the book, it's just great. It has to do with him waking up with, chapter 1, he wakes up not sure where he is, why he's on a spaceship if he's an astronaut. In the movie, that's like one of the opening scenes where Ryan Gosling sees an electron microscope and he's like, wait, how did I know that was an electron microscope? Am I smart? And so all that's tied together in a fun way. And yeah, it definitely was a story that it could almost be PG. I think there was just a couple of things that made it PG-13.
Well, it's really intense. They'll rank it PG-13 for
The
thematic
intensity,
elements.
yeah. I mean, in terms of like inappropriate content, there was one or maybe two things that are slightly off color, but it's more like innuendo than anything else that not everyone's going to pick up on. So I actually really appreciate for that. Ryan Gosling said something to the effect of he wanted an ET for this generation. You know, a fun
He got one.
sci-fi alien movie that the whole family can see, where it's not a kids movie, but it's a movie that kids could see. And I think they definitely delivered on that, which how long has it been since we've had a movie like that? I think that's why this has been so refreshing, Stephen. It's just the experience of taking multiple ages of people, and again, multiple types of sci-fi enjoyers, from the casual to the almost never to the hardcore science enjoyer. It really spans the spectrum. Hollywood has tried to do this a couple of times in recent years. Ad Astra, the one I talk about a lot too much, which fell flat because of the total weird science that was in it, or anti-logical science. And then The Creator with Denzel Washington's son. I can't remember his first name. The guy that was in Tenet. And a great, interesting movie about AI and robots and global war that's not the Terminator. In some ways more optimistic, in some ways not. Didn't really hit the mark for a lot of people. Those movies were relatively clean, I think. There's probably more profanity in both of those. But yes, definitely less than The Martian had, which was also kind of refreshing because it doesn't really bother me as much, but it's like, oh, this kind of limits who I'm going to recommend the movie to.
Oh, that is true. And plus you had like kind of a rear male nudity scene in The Martian, which kept me from seeing it for a very long time. And just, I don't like people getting exploited like that, even if it doesn't do anything for me personally. So we've used a few terms here like refreshing, wholesome, I would say virtue, celebrates, stories like that. And I think especially for a lot of evangelical listeners, they may hear that and they think, well, doesn't that make this story basically Christian? I mean, it may as well be because it's clean and wholesome. It's for the whole family, even if it's intense and probably for older kids. I wouldn't bring a 4-year-old there. He or she would get bored. But let's talk about what we mean by optimistic stories, because I want to qualify that. First off, specifically about Project Hail Mary, it is interesting that now, 5 years after the release of the book, we get the film. The book released May the 4th, 2021, very nerdy release date there, author Andy Weir. And those who were alive back then, almost everybody, will remember that this is basically the waning days of the pandemic lockdown, right? That had been going on for about 14 months. And I think the book really hit at a moment where people were ready for, whether you believe in a vaccine or some kind of regulatory solution, people really like this idea of you can fix these problems with science. And Andy Weir's previous hero, astronaut Mark Watney of The Martian, was able to get himself off the planet with science and with a lot of help from his friends back on Earth. It was like a narrow escape and people went back for him and all that. Matt Damon, he's constantly getting lost and behind enemy lines or on other planets. And in this case, he was certainly worth saving. But with Project Hail Mary, really came along at a time and was even more optimistic. The story, despite being based on a lot of hard science and speculative science, celebrates the human spirit. It celebrates the human will, but it also celebrates the characters, which is something I've thought for a while the best science fiction will do. And as a hint for some of you aspiring sci-fi writers out there, whether or not you go hard or soft with the science, it's got to be about the human beings. It's got to be about the human virtues to be really good. And I read Project Hail Mary not on the page, but first via audiobook. And the narrator's name is actually Ray Porter, who also voiced Darkseid in Justice League. Terrific performer, great narrator. And probably because the film was released by Amazon MGM, they actually involved him in the marketing, which I think is a great way to give some honor to an unsung profession, that of the audiobook narrator. They've really celebrated everybody behind the scenes as well as Gosling. And, even the marketing for the film is so positive. And as far as I can tell, they seem to give all of the artists their due. So they're not just telling you, hey, celebrate the human spirit, but they're showing you. And as Andy Weir said in a YouTube interview with The Critical Drinker, It doesn't include the message, which is kind of this, YouTube critic or popular fanboy expression for leftist or socially woke politics. And Weir specifically said, I don't put politics in the story. He didn't say it's a conservative story. I would have not liked if he'd said that. He said it is just a story. He's like, I don't even have any symbolism in this story. It's just for entertainment. Well, Mr. Weir, don't sell yourself short. The story is certainly about humanity. And yes, the flaws of humanity, Ryland Grace, played by Gosling, is arguably a coward who's kind of an isolationist type of guy. He's been hiding from the world in kind of a comfortable job. But it turns out that, as the meme says, he's suddenly become very important at work. And so he kind of ends up being this representative. Grace is a representative of humanity, despite his name, which I'll talk about in a moment. So yes, Andy Weir, there is a symbol there. Even when they were talking about showing him waking up with amnesia and he gets out of the pod, he's been in a medically induced coma and he discovers what his purpose is in this world. And of course, there's a symbolism there. And the symbolism is, not in a bad way, deeply humanistic. Project Hail Mary is a humanist story, and not in a bad way. Before we talk about secular humanism and godlessness and, presumed atheism and such, let's honor it on its own terms. It's like the best of Star Trek and the best of science fiction proper. It's assuming, as part of its worldview, hey, humans are very flawed. We can be cowardly, we can be sloppy, and we can be, lonely by choice. But sometimes if we're pressed into service and maybe even some bad circumstances leading to that, we can rise to the occasion and build relationships and decide to be heroic. And I think that's great. And I think I like Brett McCracken's review at Gospel Coalition. He wrote that Project Hail Mary honors biblical virtues. It, quote, celebrates friendship, sacrifice, and self-giving love, end quote. Well, in this case, Weir is right. That's not a symbolism. It's just the thing itself. And I think it's great to have that in a common grace story. Now, I'll ask you, Zach, before we move on, does that mean that Project Hail Mary is a Christian story or a Catholic story?
I think Project Hail Mary could not exist without Christianity.
Amen.
The kind of optimism that's in the story. And by the way, we're gonna, even just by calling this an optimistic story, we are giving a somewhat of a spoiler here that there's a happy ending, right? And we'll probably have other spoilers. This is not a movie review podcast. We're going to talk about the meaning of this movie. So again, if you haven't seen it, go pause this podcast and go see it, then come back.
Everyone's seen it by now. We're good.
You've been warned.
Number one movie in the universe. Yeah.
But this makes me think back to a previous guest we had on the podcast, Dr. Sarah Salviander, a PhD astrophysicist who came from an atheist background and discovered Christ first through a story. She came to Christ first after reading The Count of Monte Cristo. She needed a big, thick book to read over summer break before everyone had the internet and cable TV. And the theme of forgiveness in this and God's justice really spoke to her. And she's like, this is so alien to me as an atheist. I need to look into this more. And kind of like with C.S. Lewis, she first became this kind of general theist, okay, I think there is a God that's directing at least human nature. And then through science, she realized God created this universe. There is no way this universe came out of nothing with all of these properties that she understands as a PhD astrophysicist. That was episode 227. I definitely recommend going back to listen to that, because Sarah's other big point is that the modern science we have only exists because of Christianity. Some of the top scientists in every discipline, starting in, and she has a whole presentation on this, and we touch on that in the podcast. Starting in the 1800s, almost every single scientist was a Christian at some level, and some of them deeply, deeply Christian. That's what Johannes Kepler said, that I'm thinking God's thoughts after him by studying the cosmos and trying to understand it. I'm paraphrasing. So to have an optimistic sci-fi requires Christianity as a base layer. And I think so, as people are drawn to the story and they're drawn to a hopeful resolution where science is being used for good, and actually the science is kind of the important part of the story. It's not just, smash the aliens or shoot our way out of something or in the I always make fun of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek where Kirk literally kicks something to save the day. It's like, no, they're actually using their brains. They're loving God with all their mind. They're, because ultimately, what is science? It's problem solving. Why would you want to solve problems unless you thought humanity is worth saving? Why would you think humanity is worth saving unless you have some version of an Imago Dei view of humanity? If you think that humans are a cosmic accident and we're a virus on the earth, and we're no more important than rocks or flowers or animals, then sure, a pessimistic story makes a lot of sense with that kind of Darwinian, like strictly Darwinian materialistic worldview. But if you think there's something transcendent about human life, I mean, even Elon Musk talks about this, that we should not let the light of human consciousness ever go out. He's not a Christian, although he seems to be moving closer inch by inch. He thinks there's good things in Christianity and belief in God, and he thinks there's something very special about humanity itself. You're not going to get that apart from a Christian worldview. So while the movie, it does have a character that says something positive about belief in God, the book has a character that says something positive about belief in God. That isn't the point of the story. So it's not a Christian story in that sense, but it's a Christian story in that it wouldn't work in a world without Christianity.
There is a type of humanism, Zach, that we know of. It's derived from Christianity more directly. And you get hints of it in some classic science fiction. You get hints of it with those polite nods in the direction of divine providence that were common to Jules Verne stories, for example, but not H.G. Wells. You could almost trace these different strains of science fiction to Verne versus Wells, because Wells was much more Marxist. It was much more nature red in tooth and claw, much more cynical ultimately. Jules Verne's heroes delve to the center of the earth and they see amazing things and then they go back, or they get launched to the moon out of a giant cannon in the United States and then they come back and, oh, it's amazing. Look what humans can do. But then H.G. Wells, his time traveler goes into the future and experiences basically the heat death of the universe. And there's all these, multi-legged horrors crawling all over the planet and humans are long gone. And then he goes back and he goes, whoa. And you feel bad at the end of that story, whereas you feel good at the end of a Jules Verne story or Project Hail Mary or another science fiction that's based on this strain of humanism. And I think that ultimately is a good thing. Now, I'll have some disclaimers, which I'll talk about in a moment, but it is good to see virtue derived from Christianity upheld in public. I do support cultural Christianity to that extent. And some people recoil from that and all they see is fakery and fake sincerity, or maybe even appropriation. Like, why would you take all these virtues from Christianity and then act like your world can exist without God? And then you get this stupid myth that keeps extending that the story is not a Christian story if they don't, pray Bible verses or follow a particular denominational distinctive. That's nonsense. But it would be foolish to say Project Hail Mary is a Christian movie. I don't think Andy Weir is a Christian. I don't know if the directors are Christians. To a sense, it doesn't matter because it is Christianity derived. It does celebrate what's good about Christianity, and ultimately that makes it a comedy in the traditional sense as well as the modern sense. There is a happy ending. There is absolute good and absolute evil presupposed at the foundation of the story. You don't even really have to think about it. The story is in alignment with the popular conscience understanding of good and evil. It's not good for man to be alone. It is good for man to have a helper, whether it's Eve in the Garden of Eden in the original biblical history, or a five-legged rock creature that you happen to find in outer space, which isn't a spoiler, by the way. They put Rocky right there in the trailer, and a lot of people were upset at first, but I understood it. You needed to know what kind of story you were getting into, and you needed to know that there was going to be kind of an orthodox, cute companion and an amazing merchandise opportunity at the same time. But ultimately, by celebrating common grace, I think that's what makes a story what I would call an optimistic story.
Yeah, and also they had basically the hero's journey in this story, and there's a very clear character arc in this. That someone who becomes a hero doesn't start out that way, and he just has to overcome himself, like his own fear and anxiety and selfishness, and and whatever, and become almost self-sacrificial. And so he's, does the character express a religious point of view? I don't think so, but he also never says anything anti-religious. It's more that he embodies the virtue that we talk about in Christianity and what's key to our religion. So yes, you can't have it without the other one. I think and we'll talk about this more in chapter 2, but so many science fiction movies and stories, even ones I really like, are the opposite. It's very pessimistic. There's no heroes. There's no moral clarity. Everything is morally gray. We have no agency. We can't solve things. The movie itself is not even a story. It's just a lecture disguised as a story to browbeat people. And because there's no real solutions to anything that at least the individuals can do, then what you need to do is cede all of your power and agency and thinking to the collective, and let the warmth of collectivism take care of you, comrade. And so, people don't want those stories anymore, and we never really did. I mean, the collective is always the bad guy in Star Trek with the Borg or with Skynet or whatever. Something has really infected stories where that's been flipped around, and now all of a sudden individuals are bad and the collective is good. And that is not a biblical worldview. Like we must all stand before the judgment seat of Christ individually. Individual lives and choices matter. And yet we've been spoon-fed this idea that they don't. All that matters is just getting something for yourself. And by the way, that's also kind of the trend of cyberpunk, which I do like. But you read something like Neuromancer by William Gibson, that, there's no good guys or bad guys. Everyone's just trying to scrap together their own life. And, Ryan Gosling and Blade Runner 2049 also had a bit of that. But those are not, those are really acquired tastes. It's like drinking black coffee. Like, wouldn't you want to put even just a little bit of milk in your coffee? Like, even if you don't want sugar or half and half, just a pinch of milk just to cut down the sourness of, I don't know. Some of you drink black coffee. I don't know how you do it, but I just can never go full pessimistic with stories. But I think we're so used to that because fear and despair, it's so much more addictive, and it's easier to sell in a sense because we're wired to look for danger, and we're wired to like be on alert for things that threaten us. And so a story where that's happening and where it kind of leaves you with that sense of, well, I guess I got to always go look out for this social ill or that thing. Whereas a story that leaves you with a sense of like, you can solve your problems and become a hero. It's so much more empowering. And I think that's the actual problem with so much of entertainment is a lot of the people producing entertainment don't actually want to empower anyone. They want to enslave people to
gain power.
Things. Yeah.
Empowerment versus gaining power. It is all about power in those cases. And that's where the cynicism comes from. Everyone's just out to gain power for themselves. So don't hate the player, hate the game, just get involved anyway. And actually just learn to love the game. And I refuse to learn to love that game. I will say that I do not think that optimism here with stories is the same as being light and colorful or even always a happy ending. You may have an optimistic story where someone experiences a bad ending but still has hope, or maybe one character has a bad ending but another does not, and it's a cautionary tale, but one that still celebrates virtue altogether. So I don't want to conflate those things, and we'll talk in a moment about next up, stories that pretend to be optimistic but are actually cynical. However, I got a sponsor in between. The Whole Man from Dan Dates, who's been on the podcast before. And although the premise sounds rather cynical, it sounds like there's a redemptive angle to it. This is The Whole Man, Dan Dates, endorsed by our own Zach Russell, right in front of me, who love the realistic action, witty banter, and redemptive heartbeat. This is the exciting military debut by Dan, who's a military test pilot. A dying rebellion, a broken family. Can an executioner bring both back to life? More science fiction for you, folks. The Whole Man has the ugliest job in the universe. He feeds human sacrifices into a black hole. Disgraced pilot Baird Larson is the Whole Man, alone on a space station, completing his grim duty, told that he is appeasing the gods. but he just wants to finish his penance and return home. But will his daughter even give him a second chance? Then the next sacrifice arrives. She changes everything. Mysia, a poised rebel with a provocative fire. She doesn't beg for mercy. She explodes his beliefs. Torn between duty and treason, Bayard must choose whether to execute another innocent or join the Shadower rebellion against the Overlord, who made him this monster. The fight ahead is brutal, and his combat skills won't be enough. Can Bayard break free from his past sins, save those he loves, and bring hope to humanity's last outpost among the stars? Or will the hungriest black hole consume him first, the one within himself? That's The Whole Man by Dan Dates, available now in all formats, including a multi-narrator audiobook. We've got that in our library. You can go to lorehaven.com and look it up and see The Whole Man in our sponsors this month. Chapter 2, Cynical Stories. Let's draw the contrast. I don't mean a noble dark story. I don't even mean a dark story. I don't even mean a story with a tragic ending or a muted or grayed out color palette. I think a lot of people make these judgments based on appearance. I would disagree. I would define cynical stories as those that show sin and basically nothing but sin and to a fault. Now, these stories may kind of give a polite nod in the direction of goodness. Maybe there's a side character. Maybe it's just off the page somewhere. And these stories may not celebrate the bad things that they're showing, but when all they show is the bad stuff, then you get the idea that the storytellers actually are into that sort of thing. And Zach, you mentioned earlier that there are a lot of stories like these, but I would say at least at the current moment, at least according to the memes and the majority opinions we've seen, these stories are not in vogue at all. I doubt that they're going to be greenlit at the big franchise level or the big book level by people. At least people who want money as opposed to people who want to earn in other social cryptocurrencies. Maybe earn your money back by the cool elite people thinking you're awesome with your story, but you're going to be crying all the way to the debtor's prison there. These stories just aren't successful. And fans are condemning cynical stories that seem to show for its own sake hopelessness and grim darkness and nihilism and despair. But these stories are not popular. They're getting canceled. Even stories that make a valiant ploy at being optimism, those too are getting canceled if people suspect that they're being sold a bill of goods, if they're being sold a fake sincerity. If you fake sincerity, then that's how you make it. Well, fans can catch on. In fact, some of them are arguably hypersensitive. They don't want cynicism. They don't want your political agendas. They just want to celebrate humanity and problem solving and good, honest heroes. Those stories, by the way, the good ones, the optimistic ones, will show sin, like I mentioned earlier. But the cynical ones err in ignoring virtue, or they minimize virtue, or they show that virtue is hypocritical. And I think by now everyone could agree that Game of Thrones ended up that way. Because I'm a Christian, and I mean that most sincerely, I've not seen Game of Thrones, and I will never see Game of Thrones. I don't think I've even seen a clip. I know some of the memes, and that's it. But based on the nihilism of the original books, according to those who had read them, a lot of people foresaw the bad ending, especially because there is no ending and the man still can't finish a series for any right or money. The TV people had to finish the series for him, and apparently their finale was not good. And so a lot of people walked away very cynical. And yet, Zach, I have heard people praising a spin-off series, which apparently has some naked bits, but actually celebrates knightly courage. And people said, yay, here's a sincere, wholesome series that actually celebrates what's good about being a knight. And there's an everyman hero and all of this. And a lot of people really liked that show. Knight of Seven Kingdoms, I think it was called. I still won't see that either. But it's just interesting that even some, if the cynical stories are not going to win, fans are now so annoyed by this that they will even go after stories that say that they're optimistic and bright and colorful, but then kind of end up being just posers. There's a type of approach I've seen which kind of tries to have its cake and eat it too, where, okay, well, this is going to be an optimistic story. This is going to be like, because you guys like that kind of thing, so we're going to be optimistic for you. And the people go to the movie or they read the book and they kind of go, this is not realistic, actually. This is stacking the deck in favor of a sort of hollow optimism. This doesn't work. we're not actually showing reality. It feels fake. And I think that's what happens when you get an author or a movie maker who knows that the people want optimism, but is, like you said, Zach, a natural cynic. I mean, this business can make cynics out of optimists, so I don't blame them almost. But they're kind of being paid to fake sincerity. And I call that sincerity, synthetic sincerity, SYN sincerity. You can almost see the memos like, hey, Johnson, this movie needs to be positive and encouraging. K-Love, positive and encouraging movie. It's got to be optimistic. The people demand optimism. So you need to fake the optimism, and then, we'll get you a sequel and a franchise deal. And I don't think that's going to work. But with Project Hail Mary, it does work because the directors actually seem to be optimists, and God bless them for that. I'm sure it's very difficult to keep a positive human spirit in such a business as they're in.
There's a great quote I found from Spencer Askew on Twitter, who says, quote, "Society is starving for hope. Cool guy cynicism is dead. People are craving earnest even when it's cheesy. We are through resonating with jaded and bitter characters that turn up their nose at concepts of goodness and self-sacrifice." Yeah, and I think that's exactly it, Stephen, that we've kind of had our fill of that. We've really hit peak postmodernism or deconstructionism. And as a society, we're like, I don't want to spend any more money on that, to watch things that just demoralize me. I think, like you said, this book came out at the tail end of all the lockdowns, and people got through that and were like, whoa, what is happening to society? And then a lot of things got much worse after that with, well, we don't need to go into all of it, but so many things really demoralized people over the last few years. But now we're at this point of like, okay, it's easy to just tear down and criticize everything and be cynical and ironic and jaded. At some point, I've got to build something. I've got to pay the bills, go to work, and build a family and take care of things. Like, I need to have some guidance how to do this. I need stories to inspire me to be a better person or to achieve harder or whatever it is. And yeah, these stories where everyone's despairing isn't really giving me any fuel. It isn't nourishing to my soul. And another quote that really stood out to me was about this movie was from Bishop Robert Barron, a Catholic. And he said, I know lots of people say that Christianity is in irreversible decline and that we are inhabiting, at least in the West, a post-Christian society. I'm not so sure. Like it or not, we remain a Christ-haunted culture, and a film like Project Hail Mary makes this clear.
That does make it clear. And the more Christian a story can be, and made with excellence, the more successful it's going to be. The trend holds. I don't mean that a movie needs to be optimistic in the sense of like an almost intentionally cheesy Christian movie where they don't really deal with the real world. They deal in this sort of elseworld social drama land. But even those films are kind of on the wane right now. Christian-made stories have leveled up their game, along with certain general market stories like this. And I love honest optimism. I want to talk next about why Project Hail Mary is not optimistic like some people think. It's better. It's deeper. The fact is, it's got to be honest. Now, there's no real way to be an honest cynic, because if you are a real cynic as opposed to a poser cynic, who wants to impress the cool guys or something, if that is actually you, first, the logical conclusion of that is not to make anything. You are literally going to roll over and just wither away as a human and not build anything, not even a cynical movie. So there's got to be a little optimism even in the cynical story maker. But the honest cynic is at odds with reality. Yeah, that's why it does not work. Real life is not a tragedy. Real life is a comedy. And that's in accordance with many religious worldviews, not just the biblical one. Classical humanism of the Christianity-derived variety thinks that humans are cool even if they have no place for God whatsoever, other than maybe a polite nod like Captain Kirk to Apollo. Those kinds of stories share an optimism about our destiny, and they are therefore more realistic. So real people like these kinds of stories if they're in tune with reality because they match reality. But let's talk in a moment about the pessimistic side of Project Hail Mary, leading to the Optimism and other stories that are like it. First, however, speaking of space travel, I am pleased to announce that even though I'm working on the sequels for my sci-fi launch Above the Circle of Earth, there's also a prequel on the way. Yeah, I'm breaking news right here. Zach, you probably didn't know there's a prequel on the way to Above the Circle of Earth, and it's called the NASA Artemis II mission. And even though we talked about it a couple of months ago, they had to scrub the launch because of some leaks. Now, the SLS, the Space Launch System, is back on the launch pad, and it is ready to go. This episode releases, Lord willing, Tuesday, March the 31st. And that means that if the current calendar holds, Artemis 2 will launch with its 4-person crew, a manned mission to the moon. The first time since 1972 that humans have gone anywhere near the moon. They're not going to land on the moon, but they are going to orbit the moon. And they redid the whole Artemis mission architecture after our last episode. So now apparently Artemis 3 will not land on the moon. They're going to do, I think, an orbital test or something. But that means that Artemis 4 and 5 landing in the same year that Artemis 2 would have landed, I think it's 2028, will land on the moon. So they're literally planning manned missions right now and effectively laying down the foundation for those Above the Circle of Earth sequels I mentioned. First, the astronauts and the explorers go to a new world, whether it's a new continent or a new terrestrial body. And then after that, the people come. And then after that, you need missionaries. And that is the launch pad for my series, starting with Above the Circle of Earth, where Brock and Alicia Rivers escape persecution and exile by putting together the first space mission over and against the dark plans of some of their own people and the opposition of the one world cause. Because in this world, there are some good humanists and there are some bad humanists. And cause, they are the bad humanists. That's Above the Circle of Earth from Enclave Publishing, available now on all systems, hardcover, audiobook, and digital. More information in the show notes for this episode. Chapter 3. Many great stories rightly reflect both sincere optimism and realism about human flaws and struggles. This goes to something I mentioned earlier, that realistic stories are not cynical stories. That is a bad definition there. But also stories that are colorful are not necessarily optimistic. What really matters to make a story sincere and optimistic and wholesome, even full of common grace, and Hail Mary, full of common grace, they're defined less by their appearance and more by their ideas. Zach, I think we've seen animated films that are deconstructive. They have bright colors and maybe fun-ish songs and happy characters, maybe dancing penguins, but they are ultimately deconstructive. Any happy ending rings hollow because maybe the people who made it are posing at optimism, or maybe they want to have their cake and eat it too. Well, let's be all cynical about this world, even if we have a token character who's heroic and optimistic, but ultimately at the end, maybe people come away from that story thinking, wow, that guy was a real fool. You know, he's clinging to his ideals, even in a world that is completely opposite to him. Earnest and optimistic stories that are real, I think, by the way, they can be what people call noble bright and noble dark. And some stories may be more of one or the other. I would see both in Project Hail Mary, the book and the film. There's some noble dark moments there, particularly at the end, which I actually don't want to spoil this because the book and the film both leave this explanation to near the very end, where Ryland is still figuring out what happened to him and how he got on this mission. And it turns out that the circumstances of his boarding the ship were actually extremely shady, and very dark. I'd say even morally dark, but maybe a necessary evil. And I won't say more than that. Nonetheless, despite this terrible thing that happened, Ryland becomes a hero. It's desperate times. There's only one person who can save the stars. And so despite the darkness of the situation and the darkness behind the mission, he ends up serving the light. And by the way, the story is literally about saving the sunlight from kind of a devouring monster, which looks like these little dark blotches underneath the electron microscope. Even God gets a friendly shout out. And that, to me, I think helps save the story even more. It is maybe more than a polite nod. It's a specific reference to the morality of the story. And even the science of the story. Zach, you pointed out that it's a different character in the book who praises God for inventing relativity. Who is that? What was the circumstance? It's not in the movie, so don't go looking for it there. The
Right.
sentiment is in the film, but it's much more of a science-y worldview thought in Andy Weir's book.
Yes, this is the character that doesn't get any screen time, as far as I remember, unless he's unnamed. It's Steve Hatch, who helps build the Beatles, which I won't go into all of that. And but he's talking about the fact that they're able to build a spaceship that goes pretty close to the speed of light without, breaking any known physics. There's no warp drive in this, but they figure out a pretty inventive way to go really, really fast. And Steve Hatch says to Ryland Grace, he says, quote, "Do you believe in God? I know it's a personal question. I do. And I think he was pretty awesome to make relativity a thing, don't you? The faster you go, the less time you experience. It's like he's inviting us to explore the universe, And that's on page 305 if you've got the hardback. I love that quote because, again, this is a positive view of creation, of humanity, of God. There's nothing cynical about it. This is not a character that suddenly becomes evil later. There's no rug pull that happens after this. He doesn't become the punchline to a joke, like all the things we're so used to, right? In very cynical postmodern stories. This is a brilliant character who solves another big problem in the story. And he just makes this fascinating insight. Now, Andy Weir didn't have to include that line. Or if he did, he could have made it a very, secular kind of way. Like, isn't relativity cool? Isn't science cool? Like he could have just made that, but he had a God-believing character make that point. And I don't know anything really about Andy Weir. From what I've read, he's agnostic. He doesn't seem to have an axe to grind, though, with Christians or Christian characters. And I think he probably has a Christian friend, or at least a Christian loved one, or something like that. Or maybe he's aware, like Sarah Salviander said, he's aware of how many scientists were strongly Christian, and that informed and drove their scientific discoveries. I don't know what it is, but I love that he included that. And it's just a breath of fresh air, and it's just that one little paragraph. And it shows that, yes, Sarah Salviander would say, science is ours. Like, science belongs to Christianity and we share it with everyone else. But it's more that we live in a universe that God created a certain way. Think about the fact that you mentioned the Artemis mission, that we're about to send people back to the moon. And according to the pretty awesome promo images, we're never giving up the moon again. We're going there to build a moon base, you guys.
It's moon base times. It's mass drivers on the moon to launch AI-powered solar collecting satellites to Earth. I believe we will see these things in our lifetimes. It's going to be incredible for the sake of sci-fi and sci-real.
And there's, again, not a hint of irony. There's no apology being made for this. And when you have a God-centered view of the cosmos, this is what you wind up at. You wind up at God made it a beautiful place for us to live. And he told, like, one of the first things he told humans was to fill it, to go out and explore, to have children, to build things. And look, we've now been able to make spaceships. And yes, in this book, there's a very speculative way that they create this almost light speed spaceship, which maybe we'll never discover. But it works within the book and within the science that we know right now. But it's very much possible that there is something like that ahead. I mean, we're big sci-fi and space travel nerds here. This is a safe place. If you love NASA or SpaceX or both, you don't want to choose. And we're all looking forward to that. And it doesn't have to be, oh, we have to build a rocket ship because the Earth is going to blow up and decide who to save. It doesn't have to be a pessimistic story like that. It can be a very yes, there is a global catastrophe that they're trying to stop. But it's not that, like, oh, Earth is doomed and Earth is terrible and let's never go back there. It's like, no, Earth is worth saving. It's a good place. So yeah, this is the most natural type of story for a universe where Christianity is true.
Amen. Folks, there's a lot of black pill cynicism out there. Folks trying to sell you despair like a drug to numb your pain by deciding you're going to suffer along with other people. Black pill cynicism is a sin. It is actually a sin. Like, I won't say depression or despair is a sin because there's different complicated reasons for that. And, maybe you need sunshine, maybe you need a little help medically. There may be many other factors there. But choosing black pill cynicism is a rebellion against God. And that's why many fans fight over it. There are some fans who don't want black pill cynicism. They don't want to take the black pill. They believe in something higher than themselves, whether it's art or even politics or even humanity, or of course, far better if you believe in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Like, that is the only ultimate solution to such willful despair. That's the only fulfillment of optimism, by the way. So that's why fans fight over this. There are some that are closer to that than others. And then some want to justify their sin. I will just go ahead and say that. Or maybe they feel that cynicism is cool. Question authority. There is none good, no, not one. Hey, even the Bible is true. There's aliens out there and we're all just living in a simulation and we're all facing the heat death of the universe anyway. And I can't find a girlfriend. So what's the point? Well, the point is that is sin. That is against the law of God. A good creator, the loving, omni-everything creator of the universe who loves you, yes, personally. First, because you look a little like him, and that's by his intent. But also because he wants relationship with you. He wants to share more of himself. He wants you to reflect his glory. He can therefore spread his glory in the universe. God has that goal first that you mentioned earlier, Zach, to share himself across the world that he has made. They are not the same, but he is deeply personally involved with his world, the relativity and everything. He knows it. He likes it. He made it, and he knows us and likes us because he made us. But sin is in the way, and cynicism, there's another misspelling, is also in the way. And so God makes himself the hero of the story. He becomes human. He incarnates, whatever you believe about Mary, you get the humanity in there by way of her. And I appreciate, ultimately, the story's shout out in that direction, that something named Mary bore a kind of grace. And that's a little religious verbal trick that Andy Weir did. Everybody kind of finds it and they goes, whoa, that's such a cool pun. And I thought, it's kind of a neat pun, but it's more of the ideas and the symbolism there that I think ultimately will draw people to a better kind of optimism, away from cheap, cynical, insincere optimism, and certainly away from the kind of black pill optimism. Away with this particular ideological astrophage. We're going to fix it. And like Grace and Rocky, we do know the one who's going to save the stars.
Well, to you, our listener, what do you love about Project Hail Mary, which we assume you've watched by now or read or both? What do you love about more optimistic stories? What's your favorite optimistic story? So it may be something you've been embarrassed to talk about because, it's too cringe to be optimistic. No, it's not. Reject that. Tell us your optimistic stories. podcast@lorehaven.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Discord. We want to hear from you.
Yes, and I'll give one last plug for my Lord and Savior, Monkey D. Luffy, future king of the pirates. Great optimistic story, by the way. Go watch it. Netflix actually did something right amongst a sea of streamers who are doing wrong things. Don't be cynical about them. Next on Fantastical Truth, well, okay, maybe a little bit of cynicism here, but on the way toward optimism because, I think this is an evergreen announcement. That big new trailer from that big studio just hit for that big fantasy franchise remake or reboot or sequel that is just too big to fail, but it's gonna fail because of many bad reasons. They got the cast way wrong. They hired a bad writer, and they're going to ruin everything we loved about the original. What's worse? These big studios who don't seem to care, or do they? Or do they have some big secret reasons for improving fantasy franchises? Well, let's fight to love what they get good while maybe being honest about what they get wrong. Next episode. In the meantime, I'm going to be watching the Artemis 2 live stream on Wednesday. Lord willing, the rocket will go up. Everybody will live. Everybody will come back. They'll take some amazing photos and we'll be on our way back to the moon base. I love stories like this because we know the God who made the science. Some people like the science, but God made the science. That's a great reason to be optimistic. Let's push for more of these stories and let's deconstruct the ones that just want to tear everything apart as we continue to seek and find and celebrate our Lord and Savior's fantastical truth.